Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, is with us as he is most Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Nothing to talk about this morning, Travis, so why don't we just get right to the battle of the rock and roll frontmen? You want to do that?
Sounds good. Sounds real good. You're right. It's just a bone dry news day. Nothing going on.
Well, there are so many different ways to look at this Cam Robinson and Hootie Jones story. Stupidity's right at the top of the list. As I said earlier, how in the world do you think you can be sitting in the parking lot of a local park there in Monroe, Louisiana at 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday morning when nothing is going on and believe that if a police officer or officers drive by, they're not going to check out your vehicle? That, to me, is just mind-blowing, that you think you're going to be able to sit there with marijuana and 2 handguns in your vehicle and there be a chance that you're not going to be found out. It's on the stupidity scale, 1 to 10, that's 10 plus in my opinion.
Hard to argue with that, Gary. And, we talk about these guys only have to get through really a 3-week window where they're on their own. I mean, they live in a vacuum pretty much 11 months and even 1 week out of the year. It's this 3-week interim during May that they've basically been reduced to having to get through before they're back on campus and back in the vacuum. And, it's just on the surface, at least, until we learn more in terms of decision-making, it doesn't rank very high on the list in terms of intelligence.
Some people will say, well, why, how, and we just said it's pretty stupid. But at the same time, as I've said on this radio show, I've said it this morning, I've said it many times, and you've been around it, you and I both know. And some people have texted me when I've said this and said, I can't believe you said that. But if you crack down on actual marijuana usage among football teams and men's basketball teams, you wouldn't field any teams or put any teams on the court in this country. That's just the reality of it. But in this
been that way for decades.
Yeah, it has been. It's just part of the culture. And the whole key is, if you're an athlete, is avoiding being caught or failing a drug test, because a large number of these young men smoke marijuana. Some states it's even legal now, we know, but it's not here in Alabama. But people say, well, how can you be so stupid? Well, as I'm about to set you up to answer this question, for some of these young men, it's not a question of intelligence. I probably shouldn't have. I said it was a stupid act. I didn't say they were stupid. I want to be clear on that. But when you fall back into that environment in which you grew up, like you said, they're only away for a few weeks, and it's part of the culture. It's what people do. Even though you know it's wrong and you know what you've got at stake, it happens. We see it with NFL. We see it with pro athletes that get back in the environment in which they grew up and they make poor decisions. So it just sometimes is part of what these guys know and is who they are when they get back in that environment. As you said, that's why here at Alabama they have so much structure for them. But when they get home, they're on their own and they do what they do sometimes.
Yeah, it really is. I think in most instances, your formative years, what's become fairly common to you may not be common to anyone else. I agree also on the point with marijuana, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. And so accountability is still in play there. And the thing is, we know the job Alabama football does in educating these players. So there's still no excuse.
Ignorance is never an excuse, right?
And the speakers and the education that is provided, there is awareness. Now, again, old habits can be hard to kick, which is, I think, what you're essentially saying. You kind of are what you come from. And so from that standpoint, maybe some of it falls on deaf ears or isn't really paid as much attention as it should be. But it's something you could talk about on multiple levels when you get into this and sort of the culture culture and environment and all those things. But at the end of the day, they still don't have a great excuse in situations like this.
Travis, a lot of folks that are Alabama football fans are looking at this from a football perspective. It's kind of the way fans do things. And from a football perspective from Alabama, this is clearly not good. Cam Robinson is projected to be the 7th overall pick in the draft next year by Mel Kiper on his early big board for 2017. Hootie Ingram was expecting to be a contributor in the secondary this year. In Cam's case, you're talking about a first-team All-American candidate, a first-round draft pick, as we said, early first-round draft pick. If he's not in your lineup at left tackle, it changes your football team tremendously. No way around that. So from a football perspective, although that's secondary to the real life scenario those two young men are facing, it's a big blow for Alabama football if they don't come back to the team.
Oh, there's no doubt. When you hear the word felony associated with charges, football very much takes a secondary role in the situation. But yeah, looking at it from a football standpoint, especially with Robinson, Jones is a guy that was competing for a spot more so as a top depth provider behind Eddie Jackson and Ronnie Harrison at safety. But with Robinson, they don't really have right now another true left tackle type. And probably the closest thing they have to it, Gary, is a true freshman in Jonah Williams. So if you lose Robinson, and at this point, who knows how this will all play out, but if we were to sort of look ahead at a potential scenario without Robinson, I'm not sure Jonah Williams isn't your best option right now at left tackle. Now, Lester Cotton could kick out there. He worked at left guard in the spring. We know Corin Curvin's a veteran guy that played there some and worked with the first team in the fall in the spring. But I would think those three would have to be your primary options. I know some people point at the Charles Baldwin dismissal now and think that it's an even bigger blow, but believe me, if you kind of saw how things played out in the spring, you wouldn't think that. So the top three options at left tackle behind Robinson still are what they were at the end of spring, and that's Curvin, Williams, Lester Cotton, I would say at this point.
And for Cam, as I alluded to earlier, Travis, and again, we're getting the cart way in front of the horse because right now it's about real life scenario. But from a football standpoint, he potentially has cost himself millions of dollars. His college career is now in jeopardy. And because of that, and we know talent usually trumps just about anything else, and I have no doubt that somewhere along the line, if he's not in jail, he'll get an opportunity to play in the National Football League because of what he possesses in terms of being 6'7", 315, athletic with quick feet, long arms, and a great left tackle. But this is a huge blow to him financially going forward as well. Just mind-boggling how much money he could be looking at losing.
And it kind of speaks to the short-sighted nature that we see so often with young people. I mean, when you think about it, Gary, he is, 8 months away from being set for the rest of his life potentially? And to potentially throw it away with something like this, or at least cost himself, as you said, $5 to $10 million potentially. And again, it's very early, who knows? But it's a shame. It'll be interesting, though, because the NFL at one time, it really didn't matter. It was all about could you play. And from that standpoint, I think we feel pretty safe in saying that Cam can play. But it's sort of a new era at the next level. And off-the-field issues obviously are being paid much more attention to, as they should be, because these teams are investing millions of dollars in these guys. But, as far as big picture football-wise, it could be a very costly mistake for Cam Robinson.
All right, Travis, I know you're not a lawyer, and Paul Patterson is, and he'll be on with me here in just a little bit, so we'll get into more of the legal wrangling that's going to go on. But you also know that attorneys are going to be hired. I'm sure high-profile attorneys are going to reach out to the families of these young men to offer their services because of the nature of this case and who's involved. And there'll be a lot of legal wrangling. And there is a chance, certainly, I think, in the stolen handgun charge to get that knocked down. I'm sure that a good lawyer is going to try to find a way to prove that Cam Robinson had no idea that that gun was stolen, but we'll see. We'll let that play out. My question is, in your opinion, what do you think the chances are that either one of these young men play football at Alabama this coming season?
Wow. As you just said, it's so hard to say it this early on. I got to think, the felony is the thing you have to concern yourself with the most, because if that isn't sort of reduced or resolved altogether, football is the least of your concerns if you're Cam Robinson. So, right now I'm going to sort of go with the belief that they will play, or at least one of them will play during the 2016 season. But as for games lost or the potential of any games lost, who knows at this point?
Yeah, and as we continue to stress, this is secondary. Football is secondary and should be to them getting straightened out in the legal system, then hopefully learning some life lessons that will stay with them for a long time. And I know you and I continue to scratch our heads at this, as everybody is, but it did happen, and Alabama football now has to deal with it as well. We know Nick Saban is very measured. Do you expect a statement from Coach Saban today of any type, or maybe he'll wait and evaluate things before he puts out a statement, or maybe he'll just put out a statement saying that we are evaluating the situation? You think anything comes from Alabama football today officially?
Wouldn't be surprised if he did offer a 2 or 3 sentence statement that we've seen in the past, right? The kind that basically touch on they're aware of the situation, they're gathering facts, and they'll handle it internally, because that's been the approach for 9 years, and I really don't expect it to change going into year 10. So, yes, I would think, given the high-profile nature of Robinson, that we'll hear something of some type from Alabama football today.
Well, before this happened, I was all excited about having you on to ask you about Savannah and the Northridge soccer team finishing second in the state in Class 6A and coming very close to winning the state championship, a hard-fought, tough loss to John Carroll. But in the semifinal win, she got kicked in the face and still managed to score the winning goal on a header. How about that, huh?
She gets the toughness from her mama, is all I can tell people, I guess. But, that kind of sums up her from the time she could walk. And that's, if it was a competition for a juice box, she was going to be the first to the refrigerator. So while it's maddening at times in terms of her siblings and even her parents, that competitiveness shows up at some good times as well. And got to credit her teammates on that play. They just set it up perfectly. A short corner from Anna Maxson and also Annika Struthwolf to get it to Savannah's head, and just a perfect play. And Carter Hill's program, just a great year. So enjoyable as a parent, because the chemistry was great, not only among players, but the booster club, the parents. All the agendas were the same, which can be an issue in high school athletics at times. But everybody was in it for the right reasons, and I think that's a big reason why, along with having what I consider to be the best goalkeeper in the state of Alabama, and Catherine Spence, why they were able to achieve what they achieved the last couple of years, and saw it with the boys program this year too, Gary. So great things under Coach Hill, and I think they're set up to roll for quite a while now.
One more subject I want to ask you about before we get to the Battle of the Rock and Roll Frontmen, and obviously we could have talked about softball, but that got eaten into, and the men's golf team hosting the regional. But Bama baseball going on the road this past weekend, we've discussed this before. When they score runs, they can play with anybody. They scored 25 runs in 3 games, including 4 in the top of the 9th in Game 3, and they sweep Arkansas to get to 15-12. And my guess is now pretty much a lock for an NCAA regional.
They're at that magic number of 15 that we've been told is what matters when you talk about conference wins in the SEC. And to go on the road, and the bats had been coming along a little bit, but to see the run production finally show up, and the long ball on top of that, and extra base hits, That was very exciting to see for this club, and we're able to overcome a real large dose of adversity on Sunday. You don't see Thomas Burrows give up a two-run homer to potentially lose a game for Alabama, but it happened in the bottom of the 8th, but Alabama answered right back with 4 in the top of the 9th and get the sweep out there over the Hogs. And a lot of pressure, I got to think, off this team right now, Gary, knowing that they should be in from an at-large bid standpoint, but get a couple more wins in the SEC this weekend, maybe in the SEC tournament, and where you're sent could be more favorable. Instead of Tallahassee, maybe they end up in Hattiesburg. That would be a nice trade-off, I would think, for Mitch Gaspar's team.
Indeed. All right, Battle of the Rock and Roll Frontmen. Before we close it, we're going to go British metal. You ready?
Gotcha.
All right, because you and I both grew up with these bands. Bruce Dickinson and Iron Maiden,
Oof.
Theatrics, loud, screamer, the big show, the blow-up dummies on the stage, kind of scary.
The mascot.
Yeah, and intimidating. And then Judas Priest, just in your face, hard-hitting British metal with Rob Halford leading the way. So there we have it. Iron Maiden with Bruce Dickinson versus Judas Priest with Rob Halford. Where are you going?
I was wondering when you were going to go here. I knew it was coming. I didn't really mention it because it is very difficult. I had an older brother that was 3 years my senior that was an absolute hellion. So without him, I wouldn't have really gotten into British metal in the 80s. But my mother would send me to these concerts to basically chaperone my older brother. So I went to these shows in Jacksonville, Florida at the old Coliseum down there. I'm going to go with I got to go with Maiden and Bruce, and it's close because both were outstanding vocalists and still are, I think. So, but Eddie the mascot for sort of the mascot for Maiden. They would run him out there and freak everybody out. But both were great shows. I side with Bruce a little bit on this one.
Well, I'm with you. I think I do too. Although, with what we're talking about today, a little Breaking the Law by Judas Priest would probably be appropriate.
Great. Oh, gosh. If you haven't already queued that up, I'm losing confidence in you, Gary.
All right, Travis. We appreciate it, and going to be interesting to see how this plays out with Jones and Robinson. But as you cautioned us, that's all you can do is let it play out in the legal system and see what happens after that. Appreciate the time, Travis.
Sounds good. Thanks, Gary.